period of time, it was down to 122 over 80.
Are you in the Zen mode?
Yeah, well, you know, you wait in a quiet room, you know, I was able to contemplate all the
Mine's always
major
high
things
as
of
soon as
life.
I walk in. Mine's always high when I walk in the office. Because I'm just so excited to be there.
Well, my doctor has a very soothing voice. She's also Satan, but
Well,
We went through this whole demonic possession thing earlier.
What she look like, Matt?
Take it we are filming this since
of course, Don is ready and willing in there.
Don is ready, willing, and able. Give us a little port to do the cell phone charger, do you?
Well, that'd be good to have. I do have a plug over here. If you have
I got a plug too. I have to. Just can't go longer than 22 percentage points off my phone. We could have the camera, please. I think that's the time, isn't it? 6:30. It is.
Tis.
Call the meeting to order, study session for LP Pride operations on June 3rd, 2019. If everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If I could have roll call, please.
Councilpersons Breeding.
Present.
Higgins.
Here.
Kelsey.
Here.
Parkinson.
Here.
Ross. Here. Salcido.
Here.
And Mayor Carnes.
Here. Well, good evening, everyone. There are some questions from council in reference to the operation of LP Pride, so we deemed it necessary to have a study session for that. To that end, we have Deputy Chief Richard Klokovich here, who is in charge of the police department with Chief Waters being at the FBI Academy for another week, I believe it is. I think we'll start this off by Deputy Klokovich, if you could give us an overview of how Pride works, because it's been a while since that's been publicized, and for the public out there, maybe our new residents, it would be a good idea to let them know how the system works.
Okay.
So to kind of give everyone a background, obviously at the police department there's a command structure, and you have the chief, the deputy chief, you have the lieutenants. One lieutenant, the road lieutenant, manages LP Pride amongst other things, and then you have sergeants who are in charge of the platoons or divisions, and then you have the road officers. So if Doris is a coordinator of LP Pride, if she was a police officer, she would be the sergeant, and she would be in charge of that. She's in charge of that division. So she has that division carry out the day-to-day operations as she sees fit. You get the calls from right to her office. Some of the ordinance issues are found on patrol, and myself will call in ordinance complaints. So she runs that operation and follows up on the officers' reports, complaints. If the issue isn't resolved, then she contacts U.S. Lawns, who goes out there and typically remedies the problems that are there. And if she has an issue or a question that she can't resolve, then she seeks assistance from the lieutenant or myself. But typically, Doris is the one in charge of that program, and she does a very good job at doing that.
Walk us through a typical complaint. Say, I call in to complain about tall grass in my a house down the street. What happens with that complaint?
If you call it into LP Pride office, Doris will answer the call, she'll enter the complaint, and then she will assign that task to a code enforcement officer. There's other ways complaints come into the station, but if that was the case, she puts it in, assigns it to an officer checks that location.
By putting it in, you generate a complaint, right? On
Correct, in the BSNA system.
Okay.
If that's up and running. If not, then it would go into our other computer system, which is RMS. So,
Which is the system that the police department uses for all of their incidents.
correct.
Okay.
Officer gets their assignment, they go to the address. If it's tall grass, see if it is in fact, there's 8 inches where is the limit where it has to be cut. So an officer very well may go out there and it's not to the level where it's a violation yet. And then that call would essentially be cleared as unfounded or however the officer decides to word that situation. Or they go there, it is in violation, they would put a notice on the residence or business, and then they would have 7 days to remedy that problem, whatever the issue was.
Who follows up on after that 7 days?
Typically, the officer assigned to that complaint goes back and follows up on that issue.
Is there a difference between a first offender and somebody that's had numerous calls against them in the past?
If you go there a second time, let's say you went there the first time, you have a violation.
Yes, sir.
Second time you go there, there's a violation. Then they have 3 days to remedy the problem.
And if they don't remedy the problem, what happens?
Typically, if the problem isn't remedied, Doris puts out a work order to U.S. Lawns. They go out to that residence, and if it's the grass needs to be cut or debris needs to be removed from the property, they're contracted to do that work.
And who pays for that?
The police department has an assessment fee that we assess, and then the U.S. Lawns charges the city by yardage on what they clean up.
But eventually it goes on to their, whether it be their taxes or
If they don't pay it, yes.
if they don't pay it.
Yes.
From the time that U.S. Lawns gets the complaint from Doris that the grass needs to be remedied, what's U.S. Lawns' turnaround time typically?
Typically 48 hours. Now, if it's rained for 2 days, it may be a little bit longer because it's very difficult to cut the grass when it's sopping and wet.
Do the officers, when they go out, do they photograph the conditions?
Yes, they do.
And after the contractor cleans it, do they then photograph it also?
They do.
Okay, and that's part of the case file then?
Correct.
Okay, now Doris doesn't work 24 hours, right?
No.
So she's there for 8 hours typically, Monday through
Correct.
Friday? But there is an answering machine?
Yes.
Do you get calls via emails and such? Will those be accepted too from?
Yes.
Right.
Typically, those, I believe, go to James at City Hall, a lot of the emails.
Now, James does the city's Facebook page. Do complaints come in from, that are directed to the city's Facebook page, to your knowledge, then get turned over to her as well?
Yeah, if James gets a complaint, whether it be through the complaint file, through the email, or the Facebook page, he forwards it to Doris, or he'll put it in the BSNA system himself.
The officers that respond, how many do you have working LP Pride?
3.
That's not their only duties, though, is it?
No, it is not.
Okay, could you go into the duties of each of the
Sure.
3 people that are assigned?
There's parking routes for the street sweeping days that they have to check. They get a lot of calls on abandoned automobiles where they have to go and check, and typically if you get an abandoned auto, they go there, assess whether the vehicle looks like it's abandoned or flat tires and proper plates, put a 48-hour tow tag on it, and they recheck that issue. They also are part of the animal control and the shelter. So in between all these other things, if there's a dog complaint, especially like one at large or aggressive, they would have to stop what they're doing and someone would have to handle that.
How is it, are all 3 working at the same time, or is there a different schedule?
Typically, they're all there at the same time. Their hours may stagger a little bit here and there, but it's Monday through Friday, 8 hours.
Okay, then go ahead, sorry to interrupt, but, or were you finished?
No, I'm finished.
Oh, okay.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir, good.
What happens when you send it to the contractor and you cut the grass?
Pardon me?
What happens when the contractor cuts the lawn?
They cut the lawn, they take the pictures, and then that information is forwarded to Doris, and then she has to complete out the work order or the complaint, and then submits a bill.
Is there a ticket written when the contractor has to go out?
It's on a case-by-case issue.
No, if they ignore it, they should get a ticket right away. If you send the contractor out there, they should get a ticket, and they might think twice next time about getting the grass cut. Thank you.
Through the chair.
Yes, go ahead.
Deputy Chief, are the officers given their routes or their calls first thing in the morning? Or, because I'm thinking, you said that there are certain calls that they'll drop what they're doing and take care of those. So if that's not the case, the calls, is there a cutoff too, like a cutoff time if a call comes in, let's say before noon? Would that call go out, or would the officers respond that day, or would that be for another day?
It could very well be for another day or that day. It depends on, Doris knows what the workload is of the ordinance officers because she assigns the tasks, and she would know best if that was something they would be able to complete that day,
So it just depends on availability then, basically?
and the workload.
Okay.
Through the chair? Oh, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
sir.
I'm sorry, yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. I thought you were done.
The example that was given was for the, if an ordinance officer goes out on a grass call. However, if they go out on a grass call, and then, let's say it's not a violation for grass, but there are other violations, can the officer write up those violations? Or should they write up those violations?
If it's something that has to do with the ordinance,
Yes.
the code enforcement's duties, yes.
Okay, because I seen a couple examples of that in the reports, and I like that. Personally, I like that. It doesn't matter what the call comes in for. If the officer is out there and they see other violations, then I believe that they should all be written. Because I don't think that, if the resident doesn't know, they can't correct it, basically. So there were other examples that I wanted to touch on. I saw some where tickets were issued, but there's no way to tell when there's a ticket issued. Is it automatic that the contractor then is told to respond to that address?
The contractor responds if first-time violation, if it wasn't remedied in 7 days, second time, 3 days, that's when the contractor is triggered.
So I guess I want to make sure that that I'm understanding, because you said you want to take it on a case-by-case basis, but if the officer goes out and it is a violation, let's say for the grass, they come back to recheck, and that grass still hasn't been cut, do they issue a ticket at that point, or do they just turn it over to the contractor?
They can issue a ticket at that time. It's,
So they can do
most of
both?
the time, that's what happens, but not all the time. There's other circumstances. They may talk to the homeowner, and the lady's 89 years old, and the grandson didn't come this week, you know?
Okay. I understand that, and I appreciate that. I'm sure that the residents do too, that there are circumstances where there would be some leeway. But if I see in the report where it says a ticket was issued, that means that when the officer went back, the grass was still not cut, or the violation wasn't corrected. So at that point, do they just issue the ticket, or would the contract, would it be also turned over to the contractor?
If they're in violation, they can issue the ticket, and if the ticket's issued, whether it's issued or not, if it's not remedied within the 7 days for a first-time violation, the contractor goes out and remedies the problem.
Okay.
Isn't it true that on the first arrival, if they see a violation, in many cases, a violation is issued at that particular time, the first time that they're on site?
A lot of times, yes.
But a violation could mean just that warning, you've got 7 days to correct, right?
That's a violation, yes.
Yeah. What does it mean if I see in the report where it says that a letter was sent? That's different than?
Yeah, and one of the things that I've found in looking at all this is we all use different words. And so when he's talking about a violation, that I would refer to that as a notice of violation. And a notice of violation can be the sticker that they put on the house or the building, or it can be a letter that's sent to the owner. And I think, I'm not quite clear on why that, it could be that both a sticker is put on the residence and a letter is sent to the homeowner, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Would that be because of rental properties then? Or is there a reason for that?
It's just kind of like a double notice. You put it on the door, and then you send the letter out.
Yeah, and-
Okay.
And again, I think going back to the reports, as I look through them, again, I see different words being used, but I think they're similar actions. And that's one of
Right.
the changes that we're looking to make, is to get everybody using the same words. Because, just to let you know, I was looking at a number of different reports that we can run out of the BSNA system, and the thing that caught my attention first was I had different numbers of complaints. And I would expect that based upon the way that I asked the reports to be run, that it wouldn't be exact. But my first review, I thought the numbers were too disparate, they were too far apart. And the more I started looking at it, that's where I started noticing the use of different words. And the more that the deeper you go into the reports, then you find out that they're really the same thing. So we have to make a correction on it. I think we get more accurate reports on that.
Okay. I think I'm done.
And if I can through the chair?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Can I just interrupt real quick? Sure. Councilwoman Ross had sent a question on a number of them. I haven't had a chance to forward this on to you and to everyone else. I did make copies of what was given to me that I'll hand out to you, but understand that I have not compared this to what your initial questions were. So I didn't want you to think that we're not addressing what you brought in, but I'm just giving the warning that it may not be exactly the answers you may be looking for. I have to go review those in the morning, so.
Okay.
Send that down. One short.
Through the chair, unless Mr. Higgins wants to speak, I know you were next.
All right, well, mine's real quick. I just want to, a day-to-day for one of the Pride officers, okay, clearly they're going out and they're checking on what has already been turned in. Tell me their day-to-day operation. Besides doing that, do they go out and look around the neighborhoods themselves? Do they have their own area that they're particularly sent to? Do they cross over? How does that work?
Typically, once a week, they're assigned a major thoroughfare corridor that they're responsible for. So one of those areas would be Dix Road, one would be Southfield, and one would be Fort Street. So that's their area to specifically check for ordinance violations. But obviously, on their way to other calls, if they see something, they address it.
Okay, but that's just in the major thoroughfares, not side streets or...
No, I don't think we have a large enough ordinance platoon to concentrate our activities to an area.
Okay, but we are counting on our regular officers, and I'm not trying to degrade them by calling them regular officers, but patrol officers, we're counting on them to turn in stuff too, then?
They can.
Okay. Are they?
Not typically, they don't.
That's...
Through the chair?
Yes.
I have a couple questions, if you don't mind. First off, let me start by saying, probably 4 or 5 people have called me on issues, and I've told them to call LP Pride, and they've called me back and said they've done a wonderful job, just so you know.
Thank
But
you.
in regards to a vacant home or a foreclosed home, and you tag the house for tall grass, and it exceeds 7 days, and who would you send that letter to if the house was vacant?
It probably takes Doris or the officer some research to find out who actually owns that home. That can be time-consuming.
That's what I was getting at. All right, so if someone calls on a house and the grass is already 9 inches tall, and you send a letter, now they have 7 more days to respond. Now we're looking at 15 days for action. Now the grass is 2 feet tall. Is that common that we see this?
I don't know if
have
it's
a-
common, but it is not uncommon.
All right, my last question was in regards to a call on Lafayette Street. The grass was probably about 11 inches tall, and it was, for instance, someone was living in the house, right? So is there a immediate response to fix it sooner, or they still have 7 days if it's past the 8 inches mark?
Because of due process and everything, it's 7 days, no matter at what height it is noticed at.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Well, if I could add that if it's at 11 inches and it's egregious, they can issue a violation at the time that they investigate. And the letter that's sent out does not delay the 7 days for the cutting of the grass. I mean, the notification is left on the door, but they do it a double way for the owner over there. But it's 7 days after contact, right, after the officers have been there. And they go
Yes.
back. It doesn't matter, they don't wait for the mail or anything like that. Just want to make clear on that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
It says here that they leave a letter on the door, so it's not mailed to all of them, they usually leave the letter on the door.
Pardon me?
It says letter left on door. So, do you mail every house, or do you put the letter on the door?
They put a letter on the door, and I would have to double check, but I think they also issue a letter.
Because I went to a house that had about 6 or 8 stickers on the front window, and the letters were stuck behind the things. Now, 6 or 8, that's ludicrous. If it gets more than 2 stickers, there got to be some better system than to keep stickering it. What sense does that make?
And I don't know what your exact scenario is, but a lot of times they'll go on a call where it's grass is in violation, they sticker it, they do the recheck, it's been cut. Now maybe a couple weeks down the road, same thing. 7 inches, they go there, sticker it, recheck it, it's cut. So that's maybe where you're seeing 6 or 7 stickers on the door.
Your Honor, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
If we're sending a letter to the house, the owner, we have a lot of rented houses, so we may not be getting the owner of the property. Where do we decide we're not contacting the right person? Because,
Well, we can only go by what records we have at City Hall of who the actual homeowner is.
okay, so, but when we send a letter, do we send it to the house, to the renter, or do we try to contact? And I'd like to expand that question about apartments. Apartments not done, do we do it the same way? Or do we send the letter to the owners of the apartments immediately? Or to where do we send that letter?
Typically, if you go there and it's a renter, they'll get the notice of the sticker, and if they know who, do the research to find out who actually owns the home, then that letter gets sent out. But Doris has been doing this a long time, and a lot of these apartment complexes have the same owners, and she has that information not on paper, but in her head.
Okay.
And she knows people to call if there's an issue.
Yeah, and I can't say that this is universal, but what it appears that it's more often that the letters are going out when the owner has a different address in our system. I mean, that's, again, I can't say because I haven't looked at every single one, but the ones that I looked at, they'll be sending letters out to those, if you go into our system and see that the owner has an address different than what the house address is. But we do have those situations where the owner has put the house address, but they don't live there.
Right, well, I understand that, I just want to make sure that we're
Yeah.
contacting the owner to make sure he knows he has people who are not taking care of his property, so it's a win, they take care of the
Yeah.
situation.
And-
And then in the apartment situation, if we do have information that we don't have written down, it should be written down somewhere, so if something does happen, God forbid, to Dolores, we have backup. I mean, I think that would be just common
And I think,
sense.
and the deputy chief is right, that Doris does an incredible job and
Yeah.
has a lot of knowledge about each of the properties, but there are those that stump her. And I know my office has been involved in tracking down some of those. But she does have a very good handle on who owns it, and probably sometimes is better than what the system says at that time who owns it. But I think, again, that's been the benefit of them entering it into the RMS, or the police record system. They sometimes have better information there than what we do at times, especially if it's an address where they've been to a number of times for other reasons.
I understand
They
that,
do-
but it should
they
be
do
part
have
of the
ownership.
record that, so if something happens to her, we still
Yeah.
have the record.
Well, I think that's why, the information that we have in the system, in the BSNA system, is supposed to be the best information that we have.
Right.
But what happens is sometimes that record is not updated the way it should be updated.
So sometimes the best isn't the best.
Yes. And so again, that's why we're actually looking to spend a lot of time and effort in the assessor's office, bringing that up to the record level that we want electronically, so we know that any of the things that are coming in, which should be the best way to get the change in ownership, which then feeds into the system that should correct some of that. But some of the things, again, I'm not saying this is across the board what the issue is, but I know that I've seen where letters were sent to the wrong owner, and they said, well, it's in the system, and I go into the system, in one part of the system, it has the owner they sent it to, but if I go to another part of the system, that was updated. So there's a little bit of work, we've been working on that, so it's not universal, but I have found that.
If you have repeat offenders, does the cost go up, or there is a third offense?
Yeah, the cost does go up, and if there's violation, we go out there once. If there's a violation, we go out there twice. The third violation, it gets put on an automatic cut list.
That's what you're talking about, a violation means if the ticket is issued? Or-
Violation would be, you're in violation of the grass being over 8 inches. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, you're put on an automatic cut list for U.S. Lawns to handle.
And that cost is prohibitive, right?
Yes,
Because we're not people's lawn surfaces, so it's expensive when that happens, right?
right.
Okay, so if somebody, every 2 weeks, we're talking about that somebody needs to have, I mean, their grass is in violation. By the time the third one comes, or midsummer, then it's cut on a regular basis. And what about the criminal charges for that person? Would that also increase?
If you're issued a citation, the cost goes up from the first offense to the second offense.
Is there a third offense for that also?
I would have to double check, I have the ordinance here, but I would assume it does go, that goes up also.
Okay.
And I believe we only had 11 properties last year that were put on the automatic cut.
Okay, thank you.
Through the chair, if I may, to the deputy chief. We have 3 ordinance officers, and I think you explained they do more than ordinance. They do the dogs and stuff like that, so they're kind of like spread thin, the 3. If one of them goes on a long-term medical or takes a long-term vacation or something, God forbid, would happen to him, how do you fill that spot in? Do you work overtime? Do you assign a patrol officer to not really do that, but maybe when they're doing their patrol area to take a look if there's anything, or how is that handled, I guess?
No overtime is offered,
Okay.
and Adam had recently been off, and fortunately it was during not the grass cutting season, but the other 2 ordinance officers had to split his workload, and luckily at that time, we didn't have an animal shelter.
Through the chair to the deputy chief, when I'm driving on Dix, which is one of the patrol areas that they have, they're spread thin, but I see signs that has, call this number. Do we ever take those signs and call that number and tell them they're in violation? If we see that sign again, that we're going to issue them a citation? In other words, try to get a hold of them, because you see them pop up all the time. Temporary service with an old colonial soldier on it, says, call this number, Bob. And they're always in the easements, and they're always along the main highways, either Ford or Dix. And they're up there for a long time, and I'm saying when they actually get there and they pull the sign out, and obviously it's a violation in the easement, there's a number on there. Do the ordinance officers ever go back and say, hey, Doris or somebody, would you call these people and let them know that they're not supposed to put this, and if I go on my patrol again and find one, that we have given them at least a warning? Because obviously there's a number on there for contact to let them know so that we don't have the same ones popping up over and over. Or is that just cost prohibitive to do that because somebody has to actually make the contact in that?
They have done that.
Okay. Okay. My last question is, on the weekend, we don't have anybody, and I noticed a couple of the people that are doing the violation, they're not naive enough to realize on the weekend there is no ordinance officers, but there are patrolmen. So if I call a patrolman and say I see a tractor-trailer rig stuck in a residential neighborhood or stuck in a area, will a patrolman, at least when he gets time, not that they come over and at least document that, because after the weekend it's gone and you can't document that?
Yeah, typically they would.
They would just try
Yeah,
to work it in or
typically we handle complaints that come into the station.
All right.
Because they are ordinance violations, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was asking, because, and I apologize, I have one more question. On Monty Street, there is an apartment complex that is taking the furniture, and this has been reported, and they've investigated, taking furniture from the people that get evicted or people that transfer out, and take the furniture across the street, put it in front of a vacant home, and then the furniture is picked up because the garbage company has no idea that nobody's not living there. I know we tried to investigate it. What do we do about issues like that where they're hard issues to crack, but we have a witness and pictures that they send to the ordinance officer or police department, says, hey, I'm a resident of the neighborhood, this is what's going on, this house is not occupied, and yet I see a bed and a set of chairs and a dresser there, and this happens on a irregular basis. How do we handle those difficult cases? I mean, because you can't sit out there all day and wait for them, because that's a waste of resources.
like anything else, something like that, the person taking the call would try to get the best information that they have, whether it's illegal dumping, which is kind of what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
When does this occur? And while there is downtime, that could be an area that can be checked by officers that are working the road.
If it's
Thank you.
a continual problem, I mean, you can bring the resources of the police department to come to the aid, whether it be, I mean, if it's a serious amount of dumping on a weekly basis, even special operations or
Sure.
a detective could become involved, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Through the chair.
Yes, sir.
Do you have your officers, do they have orders to go and take down the signs? Are they on patrol and signs are illegal, so they're supposed to go and take them down? They maybe call the contractor and tell them they can't put it up anymore?
When you say officers, you mean the road
ordinance
officers, the code enforcement
The
officers?
ordinance officers.
Yes.
Okay, well, just to report this, because I haven't done it, when you go through the drive-through at Tim Hortons, it's posted on the utility pole, redo roofing. It's been there for about 2 months. If somebody hasn't seen it by now, there's something wrong with somebody's eyes. Number 2, me and Councilman Kelsey turned in a house year and a half, 2 years ago, Larry?
I don't know which one you're talking, I'm sorry.
It was on Lincoln and Abbott. I drove by there today, and that's a mess again. And at Facebook, just came up and somebody called Facebook, and they complained about it also. It's a habitual problem. Do they have a habitual list where they go back and look at these properties? Or do they just start all over the next year and say, well, no, we'll just start all over again?
Well, it's built in the ordinance that it's, I believe, 12 months where the clock renews itself for first offense, second offense, and then the automatic cut.
But if you know it's habitual like that, you should keep a better eye on it, correct? Do they have a habitual list where they can, when I was on ordinance officer, I had a habitual list. I can go to my file, and if I got a problem with that ordinance, I can go back and look to see if they were first-time offender or 10th-time offender. And I would know my recourse of what to do with that particular person. So here's a house that's abandoned, so I'm sure it should be put on a regular cut. So they do stick to habitual ones, it's just, they're there.
You still would have to follow the rules, though, because it's our intent to get paid back for the items that we're charging for, because we're not in the lawn cutting business, and we do not want the city to be responsible to have to pay for this grass to be cut on a regular basis if no one's going to be doing that. I do know that Doris, through her process of working through that, has an extensive thing through the police officers' database, where they can see how many times they've been out to that address. And I'm sure that they would not cut them any breaks, but we have to follow the rules that are established. You know, if it's our intent where we wanted to make it something different, where the automatic cut, I mean, we can amend the ordinance for that. I believe that's within our rights for that.
Then they should go by and take a look at this house right now, because I've cut my lawn 4 or 5 times, and this one has never been cut. I don't think it should be that long to have a habitual house sit there like that. They should go out there and make sure that these habituals start fresh, then start early.
Oh, do you have that address, Councilman, or?
It's a 500 block, it's right on the corner. It's on the southwest corner of Lincoln and Applewood.
Through the chair?
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the,
If people don't call in, it's difficult to go through the whole city to find
It's
a
been reported.
particular home that's habitual. I
It's
mean,
been
we
reported.
only had 11 last year that were on the
Been reported for
automatic
years.
cut.
Because I've reported it for years. That particular house. I've got pictures of it on my phone, and there was one on the other day from a neighbor that's posted pictures of it.
Well, if you reported it, would have definitely been
I reported it years ago.
investigated.
I've reported 2 or 3 times.
okay.
So, if they reported this year, okay, I just reported it just now. Let's see if it gets done.
All right, if you have information from, particularly if you see a complaint on Facebook or somebody that has friended you and speaks about that, I would ask that you forward that information to either the city's Facebook page or encourage them to call the Pride number so that we can have a record of the call-in. And you're going to get that address, what, it was Lincoln?
Lincoln Applewood?
Lincoln and Applewood, southwest corner?
Southwest corner of Lincoln and Applewood.
Okay.
It's a yellow house, it's all overgrown, and it really looks bad.
Okay.
Councilwoman, did you have something?
Yes, if I could.
Yep.
So going back to the weekend calls, if we call Pride on the weekend, we're going to get the recording. So if it's important enough, like other than grass, like Kelsey's example, where do they call? Do they call dispatch?
Yeah, typically all calls that go to the station, if you don't transfer yourself to LP Pride, would go to Central Dispatch.
Okay. And then, so then I have to ask you this. Are patrol officers knowledgeable on our ordinances? Because it won't be the ordinance officers coming out on the weekend.
Well, I guess it depends on what ordinance or critical matter you're talking about that it needs to be addressed that day. If it's something that needs to be addressed that day and it's critical, I'm sure our officers are aware of the ordinance.
If I could
Okay.
interject, a call typically coming in for this type of thing would be trash that is placed out at the curb on a Saturday when trash pickup doesn't start until Monday. That's not something that the ordinance officers would be able to catch. And that would, something that would have to be enforced if there's a complaint by a regular officer. So would the officers be aware of that? I would imagine that they would.
Yes. They would be aware that, I mean, pretty much all the streets have the signs when you can park or there's the garbage routes.
To forestall any kind of problem with citizens calling in reference to this, if you could reach out to the dispatch folks and let them know that they may be receiving, if not, they have not received already, this type of complaint, and that they're to assign an officer to investigate. I mean, not as a priority, but...
Right.
True.
Yeah, that would be a problem to reach out to Central Dispatch and let them know. You may get calls on the weekend that there's garbage out at this address and their pickup isn't on Monday. I can talk to them tomorrow, and if we want the officers to investigate that on the weekend, that shouldn't be an issue.
And you may already have done it at the police department, have, for the officers, some generally used ordinance violations in pertaining to this that may come in, whether it be the trash complaint or some other type of, maybe like a health concern at a place.
Dog at large or...
There you
Yes,
go.
the things that they may have to, if they had I'm going back to the old days, we'd have, they'd give you a sheet of paper or something with all these different things down there, or just make it available to them. I guess what I'm saying is, educate the officers to what they might have to face after hours for the ordinance officers.
Sure.
Complaints. All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
how about dog calls? Do you call somebody on the weekend about dogs?
It depends on the nature of the call.
My daughter called, she found 2 dogs, got them in her yard. She called the station, she says, well, you ain't gonna like this, but just turn them loose. Now, what kind of policy is that to have your police department tell somebody that got 2 dogs, pit bulls if I'm not mistaken, and they tell them, well, just turn them loose, you ain't gonna like it, but guess what, that's what happens. Now, what kind of policy is that?
When did this occur?
Oh, a while ago. Doesn't matter. We had people doing the dog before, even when we didn't have a pound.
Because I had recently just talked to Central Dispatch about that issue, because typically on the weekend, they have told the homeowners, if you have the dog contained, we don't have an animal control out, but if you don't mind, would you leave it in your backyard till we have an animal control officer in? So I recently had a conversation with Central Dispatch about this and explained to them, if that occurs and they can't do that, then call us out and we'll see how we can help them. And if we have to call out an animal control officer to handle the situation, then we will.
I think if somebody has dogs, which they're dog lovers, that's why they put the dogs in the yard to begin with. Then they don't want their dogs to tangle with the other two dogs, let's say.
Sure.
So they're not able to contain them in the yard. So for somebody to just tell them, you're not going to like this, just let them go. And that's exactly the words that were told her.
Well, like I said, I just spoke to Central Dispatch within the last 2 weeks about that issue.
Okay? And you say Doris assigns. So in other words, everything should be balanced on here. If one's got 20 complaints, the other one should have 20 complaints, the other should have 20 complaints? Is that correct?
Well, it's kind of like the police department. There is no typical or routine call to say that if you go on this, this is how long it should take you.
Characteristically, there's a name that pops up here all the time. So if you're saying that they said, here's your 10 complaints, here's your 10 complaints, here's your 10 complaints, then it should be characteristically they stay fairly even. Except for the guy that's taking care of the dogs, and you can see he's going to be cut short. But I mean, I think there should be some sort of balance here.
Again, Doris assigns the complaint, and she can't control the situation that the officers run into when they do. So they may be able to complete all their tasks for that day, or they might not be able to. If everyone's given the same amount of complaints, it doesn't mean they're going to be able to clear those complaints at the same amount of time.
And just to let you know, in looking at the report I had for the month of May as an example, it doesn't appear that they're being equally distributed. But again, I think the full workload is distributed differently than what just the grass and other ordinance complaints are. I mean, it looks like one of the officers is getting, you know, the more of the animal complaints than the other officer. So when you take that into account for what the workload for the ordinance part, that may account for it. But again, that's just based upon 1 month.
There are 3
looking at all the
officers,
numbers.
correct?
There are
2.5, one takes care of dog complaints.
Well,
So there's 3.
we were down, and one of the officers still not back, still on modified duty. So that means that individual can't do the full range of the work yet. So, again, May is a bad month to look at because of that, and there was also a lot of other issues, you know, that LP Pride was involved in terms of looking at flooded basements and such. So it's kind of hard to make generalizations because of some of the unique
But-
pieces of May. But
This characteristically goes back for a couple years.
yeah, no, I think,
So
again,
it should be that if they're all getting assigned, then they should be somewhat similar. Not one all the time has 10 and others have 2.
again, I think
I
that goes
don't
back
believe-
to the animal part of it, if I'm not mistaken.
Some officers handle more animal complaints than others.
Right.
Some prefer to take the animal complaints,
Right.
and some don't.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying, is I think that you can't uniformly say they all should be given the same number on the ordinance side, because you got to take into consideration that animal side as well. And again, I just know by looking at the work that's coming in and through there, that certain officers handle more animal complaints than others. And you kind of have one, when they're here handling probably the vast majority of animal complaints, you have a second one that's kind of 50-50 with animal complaints and LP Pride complaints, and then you have one that handles more of the ordinance enforcement than the animal enforcement piece.
Correct.
Can I ask, when she hands out the assignments, just for, not from pace of knowledge, does she hand them out one at a time? Does she hand out a list for the day, or how does it get, say, handed out?
I can get back with you on that, but I don't know how her exact method is, how she hands out the complaints.
Okay.
Okay, anything further? Then, no further discussion. The study session will be adjourned at 7:20. Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, but I couldn't find where to start this.
I did.
Equal opportunity bias.
Oh, you're going to go check it?
Yes, yeah, I bought two, yes.
I bought two, too.
So I'm gonna go there, yeah. So, yes.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. I've been putting off buying tickets just to bother them.
Well, you can leverage.
To make him sweat?
We make them sweat.
I was gonna just,
Hello?
Hey, John, before you leave, stop and see me, please.
I had to leave work in a hurry, so I don't have your box.
Michael, how are you? It's okay. We have much bigger fish.
Oh, wonderful.
There you go. There you
I've seen pictures of your grandson in the thing lately.
No, I don't.
I was in Texas last time. I'm glad you missed me.
I haven't been posting because I haven't been able to.
I got my other Harley on the road, the one I have when I was a kid.
That's an oldie, but
So, now I'm gonna get one.
remember that one.
Not riding again?
All right.
Not
I
yet.
turned off my microphone.
I can't even drive the truck, my foot's not working. But when I pull my bike out, I have to pull it out. And then my grandson and mom, the bike's nose to nose. Grandson either side, probably great grandson.